Warning: this story contains extreme violence, slasher elements, and murder. I encourage you to listen to the entire story, and if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and press the bell icon to stay updated. It began on a rain-soaked evening, the kind where the sky seems to bleed into the earth, blurring the world outside into a haze of dark despair. I had just moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a relic of a bygone era. It was a steal, too good to pass up, but the price had come with a catch. The house's previous owner had been peculiar. In the dim, dust-laden attic, I found it, a large, ornate mirror with a tarnished frame. Its surface was marred by streaks of what looked like dried blood. I couldn't resist the impulse to clean it off, curious about what lay beneath the grime. I scrubbed at it with a cloth, and as the bloodstains faded, the mirror's true nature emerged, a mirror of intricate, antique design, and a chilling aura that seemed to seep from its very surface. That night, alone in my new home, I found myself drawn to the mirror's reflection. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering light of a single candle. Shadows twisted on the walls, and the mirror, now clean, appeared to hold an almost unnatural depth. I stared at it for minutes, then hours, my eyes gradually growing accustomed to the dim light. It started subtly. At first, I saw fleeting shadows in the mirror that didn't align with the light in the room. I told myself it was my imagination playing tricks, the result of the eerie atmosphere and my own tired mind. But then came the unsettling clarity, a sudden, distinct image of a bloodied figure staring back at me. My heart pounded. I turned to look at the room behind me. Nothing. I faced the mirror again. The figure remained, its eyes hollow and lifeless. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but the image stayed. An icy dread crept down my spine. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. The mirror seemed to hold me captive, forcing me to watch. Then the images began to shift. A gruesome tableau unfolded in the reflection, a series of murders, brutal and visceral, a jagged blade, a woman's scream frozen in silent agony. The blood was so vivid it seemed to trickle from the mirror's surface, pooling on the floor in a growing, dark stain. I staggered back, gasping for air. I needed to know more, needed to understand what I was seeing. Desperation clawed at my sanity, urging me to investigate the mirror's origins. The next morning, I visited the local archives, searching for any information on the house and its previous occupants. My research led me to a forgotten tale, a story of a mirror cursed by a vengeful spirit. The mirror had once belonged to a woman named Eleanor Blackwood, who was accused of witchcraft and brutally executed. Legend had it that she had cursed the mirror with her dying breath, vowing that it would forever reflect the darkest truths and torment those who dared to look into it. I returned to the house, determined to confront whatever haunted that mirror. I set up a makeshift ritual, lighting candles and chanting the protective incantations I had found in the archives. The mirror's surface grew murky, swirling with ominous shadows. I could feel a presence, cold and malevolent, pressing against the edges of my consciousness. Then, the mirror's reflection shifted violently. The room behind me seemed to dissolve into darkness, and I was plunged into a nightmarish realm where grotesque, distorted figures moved in the periphery of my vision. The blood-stained scenes from before returned, now more vivid and horrifying than ever. A chilling voice echoed through the room, resonating with a bone-deep chill. "You should not have come," it hissed. "You are now part of my curse." The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, and I felt an unbearable pressure, as if it were trying to pull me in. My reflection twisted and warped, my face merging with the ghastly fit of the mirror's grasp. In a final, desperate act, I smashed the mirror with a heavy object, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. The instant it broke, the oppressive weight lifted. The room fell silent, the bloodstains evaporating as if they had never been, but the damage was done. The mirror's curse had left its mark on me. The visions and horrors I had witnessed haunted my dreams and invaded my waking moments. I was never truly alone again. The mirror's dark legacy lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the malevolent force that had been unleashed. As I look back, I wonder if the curse will ever truly end. The mirror was destroyed, but its essence remains, a blood-stained reminder that some horrors are better left undiscovered. In the darkness, the reflection of the blood-stained mirror is a chilling testament to the horrors it once contained. The truth it revealed was far worse than any nightmare, and though the mirror is gone, the terror it wrought endures in the deepest recesses of my mind. In the weeks following the destruction of the mirror, I struggled to regain a semblance of normalcy. The house, though still imposing, seemed quieter now, but the silence was deceptive. I tried to convince myself that the horrors were over, that the mirror's curse had been vanquished with its shattered fragments, but something had changed. Shadows moved with a life of their own, and whispers echoed through the empty halls. I could feel eyes on me, even when I was alone. Each night, I awoke drenched in sweat, the images of blood and screams seared into my mind. I began to see fleeting glimpses of the grotesque figures I had seen in the mirror, lurking just out of sight. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself drawn to the attic once more. The room was a mess of old, dusty belongings, but my gaze was fixed on the empty spot where something was wrong. An oppressive, malevolent energy seemed to seep from the very walls. Desperate for answers, I began digging through the attic's clutter. I hoped to find some clue, some explanation for the continued terror. My fingers brushed against an old trunk hidden beneath a pile of tattered sheets. Inside, I discovered a collection of old journals, their pages yellowed with age. The journals belonged to Eleanor Blackwood. Her writing was frantic, almost illegible, filled with ramblings about dark forces and an insatiable thirst for vengeance. She described the mirror in detail, revealing that its curse had a purpose, to trap the souls of those who viewed it. Turning their fears and regrets into a reality of endless torment, I shivered as I read her words. The mirror was not merely a conduit of terror, it was a prison for tortured souls, and its curse was designed to drag the living into its nightmarish domain. That night, the atmosphere in the house grew stifling. I could hear faint cries, like distant screams carried by the wind. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the corners of my room seemed to darken and writhe. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to escape the sensation of being watched. Then, it happened again. The mirror's reflection, though shattered, began to reappear on the wall where it had once stood. The glass fragments seemed to weave themselves together, forming a new, fractured surface. The images returned, only now they were even more horrific. I watched in horror as spectral figures emerged from the mirror, their ghastly forms spilling into my room. The space was filled with a nauseating stench of decay and blood. The ghosts of the murder victims, twisted and mutilated, floated through the room, their anguished cries echoing in my ears. I could feel their icy touch as they reached out toward me, their fingers brushing my skin with a cold that seemed to seep into my bones. Desperate, I grabbed one of the journals and read aloud the protective incantations Eleanor had written. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with an otherworldly energy. The ghosts wavered, their forms becoming less distinct, but they did not vanish. The room was plunged into darkness as a powerful gust of wind blew through the house. The candle flames flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows that danced like demonic figures on the walls. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath crystallize in the freezing air. In the heart of the storm, I saw her, Eleanor Blackwood, her spectral form more defined than the others. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. She extended a hand toward me, and I could feel the pull of her dark energy trying to drag me into the mirror's depths. With a final, desperate effort, I seized a piece of the shattered mirror and drove it into the spectral form of Eleanor. she screamed, a bone-chilling sound that seemed to reverberate through my very soul. The mirror fragments glowed with a blinding light, and the ghostly figures writhed in agony before dissolving into the darkness. Exhausted and trembling, I collapsed to the floor. The room fell silent, and the oppressive weight lifted, but the aftermath of the encounter left me haunted. I knew that the mirror's curse had been broken, at least for now, but the horrors I had witnessed would forever be etched into my memory. I left the house that night, never to return. The old Victorian stood as a monument to the darkness that had once lurked within its walls. The mirror, now destroyed, was gone, but its legacy lived on in the night. Would I ever escape the shadows it had cast over my life, or would I remain trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the blood-stained mirror had left an indelible mark on my soul, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our perception. I moved far away from the old Victorian house, seeking solace in a remote, rural town. The new surroundings were peaceful, almost idyllic, but tranquility was a foreign concept to me now. Every night, the echoes of the mirror's curse haunted my dreams, and every shadow seemed to whisper with the ghostly voices of the damned. One afternoon, as I settled into my new life, I received an unexpected package, a small, intricately carved wooden box with no return address. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside, wrapped in layers of silk, was a single, pristine shard of mirror glass. Its surface was flawless, shimmering with an unsettling clarity. I could feel a cold dread settling over me. This piece of the mirror was like a fragment of a nightmare come to life. I tried to ignore it, shoving it into the back of my closet, but the unease only grew. Every time I walked past the closet, I could sense a malevolent presence lurking within. One night, as a storm raged outside, I was jolted awake by a loud crash from the closet. The shard had fallen from its place, and the room was bathed in a sickly, unnatural light. I felt a chilling draft as the temperature dropped precipitously. My breath misted in the freezing air, and I could hear the faint, distant cries of the damned. I approached the shard cautiously, trying to rationalize the events. The reflection it cast was distorted, showing ghastly, blurred figures moving in the periphery of my vision. As I stared, the figures became clearer, revealing the horrific scene. The walls of my room began to pulse and warp, the room itself twisting and bending as if reality were unraveling. I tried to turn away, but my eyes were fixed on the shard. The horrors were becoming more vivid, more tangible. The screams grew louder, more insistent, as if demanding my attention. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening roar, and the shadowy figures from the shard surged forth, emerging into my room. Their ghastly forms twisted in unnatural ways, their faces frozen in eternal torment. The temperature plummeted, and I could feel their cold, clammy presence pressing against me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The shard seemed to act as a gateway, a conduit through which the mirror's horrors could escape. I had to destroy it, but the thought of touching it filled me with a paralyzing dread. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I knew there was no escaping the evil I had unwittingly invited. Desperate, I grabbed a heavy bookend and smashed the shard with all my might. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment reflecting the ghastly scenes of the mirror's curse. The scream that followed was like nothing I had ever heard, a bone-chilling, soul-wrenching cry that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. The room fell silent, the temperature slowly returning to normal. I was left panting, trembling, my mind reeling from the confrontation. I thought I had finally broken the cycle, but the sense of dread remained, a persistent shadow that followed me wherever I went. I decided to leave the town, hoping to find a place where I could escape the haunting legacy of the mirror. But even as I packed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mirror's curse had left its mark on me, a lingering presence that no amount of storm clouds rolling in the distance. The mirror's curse had followed me, and no matter how far I ran, I knew I could never truly escape it. The blood-stained mirror had left an indelible mark on my soul, and the darkness it had unleashed would forever be a part of me. In the end, I realized that some horrors cannot be vanquished, they can only be contained, hidden away in the deepest recesses of our minds. The mirror's curse had become my own, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of perception. And no matter where I went, the blood-stained mirror's legacy would continue to haunt me, a constant reminder of the horrors that can never truly be forgotten. I had hoped that leaving the town would sever my connection to the blood-stained mirror, but as I settled into a small, nondescript apartment in yet another remote town, the oppressive weight of fear was still with me. I kept the remnants of my life carefully packed away, avoiding the unpacked box that still held the journals and the mirror shard. I tried to resume some semblance of normalcy, but the sense of dread never fully dissipated. One evening, after weeks of uneasy peace, I began hearing faint tapping noises from within the walls. At first, I attributed it to the settling of the old apartment building or perhaps rodents. But as the days passed, the tapping grew more insistent. Rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, my nights were plagued by nightmares, visions of the mirror's cursed reflection intruding into my dreams. I awoke in cold sweats, convinced I could still hear the distant screams and see the shadowy figures lurking in. The nightmares were vivid, almost as if a reality I could no longer escape. One stormy night, as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the walls, I awoke to find my apartment filled with an eerie, unearthly glow. The temperature dropped suddenly, and my breath misted in the frigid air. The tapping noises were now louder, more frantic, resonating from behind the walls with a growing urgency. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight and began to investigate. The tapping led me to a small, unremarkable closet in the corner of the apartment. The noise seemed to be coming from within the closet's wall. My pulse quickened as I pried open a loose panel in the wall, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside the cavity was a dusty, cobweb-covered box. My heart pounded as I opened it, fearing what I might find. The box contained a familiar item, another piece of mirror glass, just like the one from the old Victorian house, but this one was more polished, almost pristine. The moment I touched it, the room's temperature dropped even further, and the oppressive sense of dread intensified. I tried to ignore it, but the mirror shard seemed to pulse with a life of its own, casting unsettling reflections in the dim light. The room warped and twisted, and I saw the ghostly figures from my nightmares emerging from the shard, their faces twisted in agony and despair. Desperation drove me to seek answers. I scoured the internet for any information related to the mirror's curse and found a chilling pattern, reports of similar occurrences in different towns, each involving a mirror or a fragment of one, always accompanied by a series of ghastly events. It dawned on me that the curse was not bound to one mirror alone. It seemed to propagate, spreading from one piece of cursed glass to another, with each fragment retaining a piece, transferring from one piece of glass to the next. I realized the true horror. The curse was not just contained within any single object, it was a living entity, evolving and spreading. It thrived on fear and suffering, finding new vessels to perpetuate its malevolence. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the shadows on the walls began to writhe and twist. The mirror shard pulsed with a malevolent energy, and I could feel the presence of the cursed entity growing stronger. The tapping noises returned, louder and more insistent, as if something was trying to break free from the walls, in a final act of defiance. I grabbed a hammer and smashed the mirror shard into pieces, hoping to end the cycle once and for all. But as the glass shattered, a chilling laugh echoed through the apartment, a sound filled with unending malice. The room fell silent. The oppressive cold lifted, but the sense of dread remained. The mirror's curse had not been vanquished, it had merely found a new home. The entity would continue to seek out new vessels, new fragments of glass, to perpetuate its terror. I left the apartment, unable to shake the feeling that the curse had followed me. No matter where I went, I could never escape the haunting presence of the blood-stained mirror. The curse had become a part of me. A shadow that would always linger just beyond the edge of my perception. In the end, the true horror of the blood-stained mirror was not just the evil it inflicted, but the realization that it could never truly be destroyed. The curse would endure, finding new ways to manifest, new victims to torment. And as I wandered into the night, I knew that the blood-stained mirror's legacy would continue. A dark final echoes of the mirror's curse faded into the distance. I was left with the chilling certainty that some horrors are not meant to be understood or defeated. They are meant to endure, waiting in the shadows for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon their dark legacy.